I don't understand the purpose of Chinese foreign policy if it is making more enemies than friends. Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan, your host, and today I'm going to talk to a distinguished scholar from Hong Kong. We are going to talk about Chinese perspectives on the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the United States. We are going to try and discuss how China looks at this growing partnership between India and the United States. And then we will talk about other issues that deal with China's geopolitical role in the Indo-Pacific region. I have with me today Professor Hong, who is from Hong Kong, and he teaches in the Chinese University of Hong Kong. He's a scholar of international relations, also studies and looks at American foreign policy. So before I start talking to him, you know what to do. If you have visited Khanversations for the first time, please subscribe to the channel. Make sure you ring the bell icon so that you get notifications of future videos. Make sure you like the video and share it with your social network. So Professor Hong, welcome to Khanversations.
Thank you, Professor Tan.
So my first question to you is, as you have just arrived here in the United States to participate in this State Department's program on US foreign policy, we are delighted to host you. You are here with a cohort of 16 professors from 16 different countries. So now that you are in the US and you are looking, and the first thing you get to see is this whole ceremonial way in which India has celebrated the United States has celebrated India, the honors that have been extended and bestowed upon Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India. He gets a state dinner. Actually, he got 2 dinners in the White House, one private and one state. And then he also got to address for the second time both the houses of the US Congress. So this is a very rare distinction bestowed upon him. Nobody from China has ever got this opportunity. So looking at this from the Chinese perspective, how do you think most strategic policy thinkers in China, Xi Jinping, scholars and professors are looking at this growing partnership, and what are they thinking?
I think China should worry about this. Just because you can foresee, just because of the visit, you can also foresee in the future there will be a greater cooperation, particularly in defense and technology transfer agreement. Of course, you can see, military speaking, there is still a gap between India and China. But I think China should worry about more economically, because you can also see, particularly Clinton also said in the banquet, and there will be diversified supply chains, more investment, particularly in technology in India. And nowadays, I think China, I think is a headache, is facing the economic headwinds. Particularly, if you ask, if I were to Xi Jinping, that I'm worried more about the economic recovery, particularly after the pandemic. Not if that makes sense, because even if you can look at China-US relationships, because I think why, at least from the Chinese perspective, why US is still very important to China, because if you look at in the past, you so-called the very successful China economic modernization, we can't deny the fact that US play a role in that,
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so if you can see now, US is changing its, strategy to India rather than China, and diversify their supply chain to India rather than, it can be a signal to give more American companies leaving China. Then that may be, very dangerous for China domestic economy as well, because you can see most of the legitimacy come from the economic success.
The legitimacy of the government, Xi Jinping, comes from economic success. So if the economic achievements begin to decline, then the government will become more illegitimate.
Of course, I think that's
and unstable. Okay. Last year, 2022 was one of the best trading years for China and the US, some $700 billion worth of trade. But I noticed that in 2023, in each of the first 4 months, in the first January, February, March, and April, the exports from China to the US have declined. So they are less than what they were last year. The US exports to China have actually increased this year. So in that sense, maybe the total trade will be closer to what it was last year, but the trade imbalance will be less stark as before. But it clearly appears that the US is moving away from reliance on China for lots of things. So I think that the strategy of partnering with India to contain China has this two-pronged thing. One is to end the kind of dependence on China for supply chain and manufacturing. And the other is to shore up India's military capabilities. I mean, there are statements from White House today saying that they would welcome India to become a great power, assuming that is. So, and all of this is happening because of some of these aggressive moves that China made on India's border in 2020, in Ladakh and Galwan, and then 22. So do you think that this sudden growing partnership between the US will make China change its policies towards India, and will it try to reach out to China, to India?
I don't think, well, if you know Chinese foreign policy, then you know there is also a continuity. And at least my point of view, I don't think China has a very good relationship with India as well. But the point is I think US still play a very key factor, So because India, sometimes you also need to have attract some foreign investment. So now I think this is a good opportunity. Well, standing from Indian point of view, that is particular. You see, Russia, China, they also have different disputes. So India also now is a good timing for this country, to show that it has some opportunity to become the world, one of the greatest power in the world.
If you remember, President Biden kind of referred to President Xi Jinping as a dictator. And for somebody who is from Hong Kong, there was an initial promise of one country, two models, if you remember.
One country, two systems.
Two systems, yeah. One country, two systems. How is it working? I mean, how is the second system working? Do you feel that China has kept the promise that it made to Hong Kong when Hong Kong became part of China in 1992, I think, right?
Well, I have been staying in Hong Kong for most of the time after the handover since 1997. For long period, what I have seen, at least we enjoy greater freedom, still we can see, the democratizations, but just up to, 2019, that is, this is a very mass protest. I think it really touched the, the bottom line from the Beijing government. So now they also imposed the national security law, and in order to, first of all, stabilize, make the country and also Hong Kong city as well. And then you can also see that is, the Legislative Council also has a certain reform. I believe that, that is the home framework, at least also Xi Jinping said, I think last year in Hong Kong in July, one country, two system still would like to preserve, but I think in a subtle way, which is different what we have seen in 1997, because you should be so-called patriotic. That means you need to loyal to your country in order to serve for the government officials. But in the past, this is not a necessary condition. This is a little bit subtle change. But I think the legal system or even education system, in many ways, I think it still preserve the old way, because you can also expect, because we have been colonized for such a long time, the way we receive the education, particular, the lawyers, this is hard to change their mindset just within 1 or 2 years. This is what they have learned, so-called the common law system. It can't change within per year. This is unbelievable. Don't tell me. They are all highly intelligent person. But there is some bottom lines that we need to follow from.
So one of the things that is critical to this whole geopolitical puzzle between the US and China and China's role is this assertion that China has become more aggressive in Southeast Asia, in the Indo-Pacific region. So the United States is stepping up basically to keep it free and open, etc. So the question really to me is that what is the point? What is the advantage for all this aggression in the region when it is essentially forcing other countries to form coalitions against China, like the creation of the Quad, for example? The India was not, I think, that eager to align with the United States to begin with, but after the Chinese aggressions on its borders, it feels that it is a very wiser thing to go closer to the US, increase its own defense capabilities. So, I mean, like, I don't understand the purpose of Chinese foreign policy if it is making more enemies than friends.
Mm. I think if you say the foreign policy is more aggressive, but from the Beijing perspective, they will say they would like to take a more active role, in the academic, in the international platform. Just say, they promote the Belt and Road Initiative, particular along the South Asia countries. Yeah, they just would like to say, now they are the second largest power in the world, and they just want to have a greater saying, at the international platform. But of course, for some countries, let's say you are South Asia countries, they will say they need to take sides sometimes because US is still the largest power in the world and also have a huge influence in Asia as well. And that is also difficult, to just ignore, the US, and just take side from the China. So that would make many countries so difficult, to decide. And I think it's more important, we focus on the people, because at the end, that is what I think US or even China would like to do, when they want to have the better, greater role in the international affairs, because we still are facing a lot of, challenges. Not to mention that it's climate change, or even you say that it's a security issue as well. I think at the end, that should be for the majority, the benefits of the people, in the region. So what the people think is more important. And then to just look at the different countries, I think nowadays, I think China is lacking a narrative, because you see many different polling, from different sides, that is rather negative,
So, there's a lot of talk these days about the power of Indian diaspora and its impact and influence. But China also has a huge diaspora, especially in Southeast Asia, Indo-Pacific, here in the US, not so much in Europe, but definitely in the US. In fact, Chinese diaspora is older than the Indian diaspora in the US and definitely quite successful too. So why is is China able to harness the power of its diaspora the way India is able to do it? Or because China is not democratic and the diaspora lives in democratic countries, are they reluctant to be openly advocating for China?
Well, I also travel with my students, to South Asia, Malaysia, and Singapore before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And we also talk with the teenagers, university students there. And interestingly, when we talk about even the senior generation that is over 16 or 15 years old, the Chinese overseas there, they are really supporting, China, but not the younger generations. They really think differently, And what I think that is, well, particular, as you say, maybe teenagers nowadays living in a so-called, not even to the world, is living in the cyber world, We also are quite supportive to, so-called liberal ideas, freedom of speech. And that is sometimes this is not the way that they perceive China, because you can see, you can Google, or
Yeah.
even using Facebook in mainland China. So I think that is maybe one of the reasons, that is so-called, even though we have so many Chinese diaspora, you can see, we could say Chinese overseas,
Yeah.
but the younger generation think differently, simply
From the
because,
Chinese,
they are living in the cyber world. They are not living in China, So,
Sure.
but if you ask the China teenagers, living in China, they will give you definitely different answer.
So this is my final question to you. Blinken made his visit to Beijing. I mean, he had initially canceled it after the balloon episode, and then he now went there on 18th and 19th of June. And there was a lot of the program was not very well known early on, and so there was speculation whether Xi Jinping would meet with Blinken or not. Not meeting with him would have seen as a kind of a diplomatic rebuff, but he actually met with him for 35 minutes, said nice things about him. And in my analysis, and I did one Khanversations about Blinken's visit, so people can watch it if they are interested, was the word was stabilization, that the relationship between China and the US is getting worse and worse. So the goal is now to at least stabilize it so that it doesn't get any more worse, and then they start working. So do you think, what is your assessment of Blinken's trip? And do you think that there is hope that US-China relations can get better? And then this contest, this so-called, like if you remember, Professor Kaufman was saying that we are already in Cold War II, right? If you remember his observations.
Yeah.
So can we, I don't know, are we in Cold War II, or this Blinken visit is very important enough to delay Cold War II or even prevent it?
Well, I think US-China relationship is still very, very complicated, because this is quite different from Cold War One, because at least you can see Cold War One, that is at that time, Soviet Union was not the second largest power, and now that is very different. And as I also said at the very beginning, I believe both sides know each other. They need each other as well at this moment,
Okay.
So that is very difficult to decouple with each other immediately. So that is better, they know each other, they are competitors. They are not friends, but at least they need to know what each other think about that. So to avoid just further, conflicts that may turn out to be, even war.
Which leads me to a second question. If you remember, Macron made a visit to Beijing, and I think Olaf Scholz also had immediately a conversation or a phone call with Xi Jinping after Macron's visit. And when Macron went, he also took the president of the European Union with him. And so there, when he was there in Beijing, he talked about strategic autonomy. He used the word strategic autonomy, which Indians like to use a lot. And so basically, he was trying to say that European countries would like to have slightly different foreign policy from the United States with regards to China. So do you think that China has a strategy in place or can successfully divide the West? So for example, the Indo-Pacific Quad does not have a single Western country. It's basically two Asian powers, Australia and the US. So is it possible that China is seeking to separate Europe from the US?
Well, that is a very challenging question because even EU itself is very complicated as well. I don't believe that that is the Beijing government we have a very clear strategy to whether united Europe or even diversify, because I think Europe is still have its own way, it all really depends on whether EU can find its own way, whether they will follow the US way or its own way. But at the end, that should be fit in its national interest. But that is even more complicated because EU involves many different nation states.
All right, last question, simple one. How serious is this Taiwan issue? If Taiwan declared independence tomorrow, will it automatically mean China will invade?
Well, that is a hypothetical question. Well, not easy question. And well, if Taiwan declare war, I think we'll better
Not war, just declares independence.
independence. About that is declare war. Yeah, I think
It's
if
the
it's
same
the
thing.
same.
All right, Professor Hong, thank you very much for
Okay,
being
thank
on
you very much.
Conversations and taking these tough questions
But
so
very, very
honestly and
pleasure.
candidly. Guys, I hope you really enjoyed this conversation. And Professor Hong is here attending the US State Department's Institute on American Foreign Policy. I'm its academic director. It is housed here at the University of Delaware. And so I will probably find more reasons and excuses to talk about China is the talk of the town in the United States. Like we were obsessed in the past with Soviet Union, and now we are obsessed with China. Everybody's talking about China, containing China, China's power, China's growth, etc., etc. So we will probably have more conversations with you as we go forward. And for those of you who have enjoyed this discussion and have not yet subscribed to Khanversations, please subscribe to Khanversations, ring the bell icon, like the video, share it with all of your friends and your social network. And until next time, this is Muqtedar Khan, your host. Be nice, be safe, be happy.
Thank you.